We're back and we're talking failures, and let's just dive straight into this one. We're gonna hit the LifeStar one. Okay, so for those of you who don't know anything about me, I'm a registered nurse for 20 plus years, and my biggest goal as a clinical nurse was to work for one specific flight company, which was Loyola LifeStar, and I wanted to be the best practitioner on the face of the planet. So you do all this kind of training, and I went and did neuro, and I did all this stuff so that I could honestly be in that position and 100% ready to go. Now at the time, you did not apply for a flight position. You were actually invited into that role. So this was somewhere around the year 2000, 2001-ish, somewhere around there. And of course, here comes a weirdo in a van. Why is it when you come to a public venue, there's always somebody who pulls up in a white van? Now I come here because it reminds me of flying. You can clearly see the tops of the trees. But why is that? Why does the white van always have to show up? Now I feel like I have to leave. All right, so quick, we're gonna do this. I'm gonna keep my eye on him, in case I have to, hit him. He looks to be peaceful. He's got an EMS shirt on. I think he's okay. You can't make this shit up. I swear to God. Anyway, LifeStar. All right, so I'm going to set this up for you. So I was working dual in the ER, and I was on orientation for LifeStar. Again, we're talking failures here. And what happened was, it was a very, very busy PM shift in the emergency room, which is where I was working. I was a trauma nurse. And at the time, there was this huge drug cartel thing which was happening in the city of Chicago, which extended its way out, towards Loyola. And what ends up happening with that is it causes a lot of gang rivalry. And even though we weren't an ER that I describe as like a guns and knives sort of emergency room, we became one simply because of, what happens with the whole drug things. And so when you get one gunshot wound, then you always have to be, expectant that you're going to receive more patients with gunshot wounds just because of retaliation. And that's what happened on this particular day. So in this ER, we had gotten one gunshot wound victim, and I can't remember, I think he may have died, but then we were told that there were more which were actually coming in. So all in all, we either had we got three of them. Two were critically injured, one was just shot in the leg, but two were from, and there were four people involved. Two from each side were in the emergency room. How am I trying to say? Two from each side, period. All right. Two of the patients in the ER were from one gang, one was from the other one, and the fourth person who was involved in this whole altercation thing, argument, whatever, the scene was still hot. He was MIA. So there was a lot of unrest, unsettlement. At the time, the ER was not locked down, so anybody could walk in and out of this emergency room, and it was serious. The first guy, he may have died. The second guy was critically shot in the chest, and we were going to be skirting him up to the OR. And then, I told you, the third guy just kind of shot in the leg. He was fine. But what happened was, one of the victims was the son of one of the housekeepers at the hospital. So not only did we have a lot of staff in the resuscitation room, the trauma resuscitation room, because we had received these three victims within a really, really short time period of one another, the entire housekeeping crew showed up in the trauma bay as well. So we were pressing probably about 40 people in what should just be a 5-bed small unit. And there were people coming in and out. There was cops everywhere. And again, the fourth guy was still unaccounted for. So the scene was very, very hot, and nobody knew, if, when, and where he was going to actually show up. So as the trauma nurse, we do a lot of work, and there's still a lot of nurses in there with me to help stabilize. But then once we got people more or less stabilized, this happened on a weekend night too. So the rest of the ER was totally hopping. So, they had to go back out there and take care of the medically sick people. And so I was in this trauma bay. We're, getting ready to roll upstairs with the one guy. And, all these people just kept on coming in and out, and they were interfering with patient care, but it was largely unsafe. So I bopped my head out, the door, and this was before Loyola, redid itself, reconstructed itself recently here. And I, kind of shouted to the charge nurse. I said, we need to lock the ER down. And I shit you not, the woman was at the desk. She was doing her homework. I'm not even making this up. I think she was in grad school, and she was doing homework while the ER was up for grabs. We had, all this shit happening inside the trauma bay. And so clearly, there's times, when you can be nice and very polite, and there's times when you just have to get shit done. And so clearly she was not going to help me in any sort of way. So I go out to the trauma bay, or go out to the security officer outside the trauma bay, and now the ER waiting room is packed with friends, family, and people from the neighborhood of the 3 people that I have with me, the victims in the trauma bay. And I say to the security officer, you know what's happening inside the trauma bay, right? We got 3 gunshot wound victims. And he says, yeah. And I say, well, you know that they're from opposing gangs, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, we need to lock the trauma bay. And he goes, well, I can't do that without permission from my supervisor. But he didn't make the call. I was just time is ticking. It probably didn't take that long. But I was just I grow very restless and irritated with people who don't take initiative to fill voids, especially when it comes to safety. You know what I'm saying? That's your job. So I said, in my swooper type of fashion, get your boss on the phone. So I called down to the supervisor. We locked the emergency room doors, everything, got settled down, and we went about our business. Well, then after the shift was over, this is really playing on me. And I was thinking to myself, not just about the potential dangers which could have happened that night, but I started thinking about, and you know what? This was actually pre 9/11, now that I think about it. So the whole, hospital safety, disaster preparedness thing, this was not even on the radar yet. That's what it was. And I started thinking these people, they can just walk in, just with a weapon or with anything. They can totally get into the rest of the hospital. This is not good. This is major red flag. And this is not I had a whole lot of pre-hospital training at this point. This was just kind of I lived in Rogers Park for a while. I'm pretty hip to what you need to do in order to prepare and prevent, any sort of tragedy. So what I did was I wrote an email, and I sent it to my manager and the manager of security and the manager of registration. Because the people who were out in the waiting room registering all the patients, afterwards they were like, oh my God, girl, I was so scared out there. All these people, all these gang members out there. It was so I sent this email, and my failure was that I didn't honor the hospital's chain of command. What I should have done, according to the hospital policy, was I should have advised my manager directly and then left it up to her in order to communicate the chain. But I didn't do that, not on purpose. This was something I didn't even know that I didn't know. I was thinking shit, this is a major problem. We need to solve this problem collectively. I never viewed it as talking up the chain of command. I viewed this as we are all one giant hospital team. This is a big problem. We need to address it yesterday. So it didn't go over real well. So the next day I get a phone call from my manager, and that PM shift, I take that back. I worked at 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. That's what it was. So in the morning time, I'm just kind of unconscious, because I got home late from working that shift. And the manager calls me and she says, Nicole, we got your email, and never asked for my side of the story. What she said was, you are not politically correct enough in order to represent the Lifestar program, and therefore we are immediately terminating you from that program. And I am telling you, I do not recall a time when my heart dropped out of my chest into my feet like it did at that moment. I mean, you think about all of the time that was put in up until that point. It was nearly 30 years of my life. Because in order to be in that spot, you have to, pull on your education from everything from first grade math, kindergarten, how do you get along with other people, like all of it, everything with neuro, like every single minute, all of the money, that I spent in college and student loans and all of the risks that I took, traveling to get to clinicals at nighttime, as a nursing student, like all this stuff comes flashing through your head, and you're just like, it was like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Like, I honestly, I never expected that. And I cried literally for 24 hours. And one thing you'll learn about me is I mostly speak in very deliberate terms, like pretty black and white. So when I tell you that I cried for 24 hours, I'm not exaggerating on that point at all. I cried for 24 hours straight. It was terrible. It was terrible. And I cannot recall another time in my life when I felt as low and defeated as I did at that point, because I failed clearly to, I don't even know. I failed to honor the chain of command, which in retrospect, I didn't even know there was such a thing, but it was a failure nonetheless. So what I'm here to tell you is that sometimes you do things and it may be the wrong time. It may just be the wrong manner. Kind of as an aside, I try to leave things on a positive note. What ended up happening shortly after that, I don't remember the time frame, was there was a major security issue that happened involving the newborn nursery because it was not locked. And let's just say that once that happened and that made the news, like the whole hospital started locking and the ER started being locked 24/7. So sometimes what you are doing may be right and it may fail at one particular time. It doesn't mean that your message is wrong or your action was wrong. It may simply be wrong timing. So as you're going through and you're, I don't think anybody's harder on themselves than you are on your own self. You want to be, both like telescopic and microscopic about your failures and look at them up close and say, okay, well, where did I totally F up on this one? Don't do that again, or tweak it, do it a little bit different. But in the grand scheme of things, was it an absolute failure? Yes or no? Do you know what I'm saying? And I think usually what you're going to find is that 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be an absolute failure. It's going to be another one of those lessons learned. Okay, now I have more wisdom moving forward. I know that there's such thing as a chain of command now. Okay, all right. And then, we'll take it from there. So be objective with yourself. It's really easy to put yourself in a tailspin when you're in the midst of major emotions and disappointment and frustration and humiliation and anger and everything that goes into it. But know that once you get right in your heart and you're sure that you are rooted in good, whatever failure you've made up to that point, you may not get another opportunity with the same thing that you were wanting to do, but usually the lesson that you've learned is going to be used at a later time for something much greater.